Hello! I haven't been making videos for a while because I've had a long COVID relapse. I'm glad to be back making videos again. It's a long process, long COVID. It just goes on and on. If you haven't seen Baby Reindeer, I highly recommend it. This character, whose name in the series is Donnie, is stalked by someone called Martha. It was very gripping, and it talks about the nuances of abuse instead of being very black and white and surface layer as abuse usually is depicted on the TV. Ever since Baby Reindeer was released on Netflix, it's been in the headlines. At first it was because people were excited by it, there was so much to take from it, but now it's because of Martha, who is apparently based on Fiona Harvey. And people tracked her down because some of the social media posts that appear in the series are really on social media and they're written by her. Richard Gadd, who plays the person Martha is stalking, wrote the series, and he also tells us that this is a real story, or at least Netflix does. She apparently left him 350 hours worth of voice messages, 47,071 emails. It says right at the beginning of the series and on the trailers that it's a true story. It doesn't say it's based on a true story. So all of this means that it's very important that at least the story is accurate. Otherwise, given that Fiona Harvey was tracked down so quickly, she could have a case for defamation. And she's now been interviewed by Piers Morgan. And ever since then, she's the one that's always in the headlines.
Well, Fiona Harvey is the woman outed as the real Martha of Baby Reindeer. She's chosen to confirm her identity because she wants to have a right of reply. First of all, why have you decided to go public?
The internet sleuths tracked me down and hounded me and gave me death threats, so it wasn't really a choice. I was forced into this situation.
When did you know that you were the person being depicted in this?
5 years ago on BBC Breaking News, I saw Mr. Gadd had written a play for the Edinburgh Festival, and he was holding up placards, MP's wife stalker, and all of this, and he'd called it Baby Reindeer. That's all I knew. And I thought, well, I've only met this guy 2 or 3 times. I don't know him.
The question, I guess, which we'll come to, is how much of the way he depicts you is true. And your position is that it's just not factual.
It's a work of fiction, it's a work of hyperbole, as I've always said. And there are 2 true facts in that. His name is Richard Gadd, and he worked as a jobbing barman, and we met 2 or 3 times.
People were convinced they'd found Richard Gadd's rapist. He was represented by another character in the series. But you don't see that accused man talking to the press. Has she been thrust into the spotlight, or has she thrusted herself there? She's now made an extremely long statement. My name is Fiona Harvey. Earlier in 2024, Netflix released a programme called Baby Reindeer, which they billed and marketed as a true story. One of the 2 main characters, Martha, was clearly intended to be based on me. A senior Netflix executive gave evidence to Parliament on oath that Baby Reindeer was obviously a true story of Richard Gadd's dealings with a convicted stalker. No doubt Richard Gadd, Clerkenwell Films, who produced the programme, and Netflix have made millions of pounds from this programme, in large part by making so many claims that Baby Reindeer is a true story. I have no doubt that the character of Martha in Baby Reindeer was intended to be a portrayal of me. The problem for Richard Gadd and now for Netflix is that Baby Reindeer is not a true story at all. I am not a convicted stalker. I have never been charged with any crime, let alone been convicted. Still less pleaded guilty, and of course I have never been to prison for anything. This is how Gadd and Netflix chose to portray me in a TV show for their own financial gain. Nobody ever approached me for any comment on the accuracy of Baby Reindeer, or the very serious and damaging allegation that I am a convicted criminal with a serious criminal record, who has spent time in prison. Nobody ever asked for my permission to present me in this way or to use my image at all. The media firestorm around Baby Reindeer and my rapid identification as the real Martha have caused untold damage to my health, my reputation, my job prospects, and my ability to make sensible decisions about my welfare and best interests. This media firestorm continues with daily bombardments of calls seeking comments on stories of every possible kind. I am making this statement to make clear that I will not be making any further media comment of any kind until further notice. With the assistance of a senior English lawyer, Chris Dorr, KC, I am putting together a legal team in the UK and in the US to take forward legal action against all of those who have lied about me and used my image to make large sums of money for themselves, with such damaging consequences for me and my family. Chris is not formally retained on my behalf and will not be making any media statements of any kind in relation to my position or any other media stories until further notice. Once I have a legal team in place, I expect that they will make a further statement setting out the next steps that I will be taking to deal with everything that has happened as a direct result of the dishonest and false picture of me painted in Baby Reindeer and in the media generally. In the meantime, for the good of my health, please respect my privacy and please stop the endless calls and messages asking for interviews, comments, and so many other things. I have made clear that I am not physically able to cope with relentless harassment from journalists, and if this continues, I will make a report to the police. Fiona Harvey, 20th of May, 2024. Fiona Harvey was paid £250 for the interview, and according to Piers Morgan, 95% of the people he interviews are paid that amount. But she now wants £1 million because the interview had more than 11 million views. And I wonder if also what's adding to this is the fact that so many people are talking in the media about how unfairly she's been treated. There have been trolls, of course, who've been bitching about her online and making fun of her and so on. But there have also been a lot of journalists, because I've seen article after article about how she's been exploited by Piers Morgan and how unfair this is, how she's a vulnerable person with a mental illness. And given so many journalists are saying this, it does make me think that this is probably a reflection of what many of the public think. So, does Fiona Harvey have a mental illness? If she's been accurately portrayed by Martha in the series, then she might have borderline personality disorder. Now, that is a big if, whether she was accurately portrayed or not. And Richard Gadd himself has said that the series is 100% emotionally true. So what does that mean? It sounds like he's saying it isn't 100% factually true. Otherwise, why would he need the word emotionally in there? But there are a couple of people besides Richard Gadd who've complained that she's harassed them. Laura Ray, who used to be a solicitor, offered Fiona Harvey a job at her law firm. But she only lasted 2 weeks because, as Laura Ray says, she was completely incapable of behaving herself. She said she was rude to everyone. She once threw a book across the room and hit a staff member in the head, and they discovered she was recommending rival attorneys. This was all in the space of a week, because she was only working there for a week before she was fired for being abusive. According to the article in the Mail on Sunday, she also shouted at Karen, one of Laura's secretaries, and demanded that she stop everything she was doing for Laura and instead do something for her immediately. And then she started threatening people and yelling. And she says it was just like the scene in Baby Reindeer when she goes from being quite nice to yelling, "Don't talk to me like that."
I miss you.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is my stalker. Say hello to Mark.
Don't you say that to me! Apologise to me right now!
She did the same thing in my office, and I told her, we're a company. I can't have that kind of behaviour. I fired her after a week. She was furious and threatened to do this, that and the other to me. She then ran out of my room shouting that she wasn't going to leave and that she was calling the Law Society. And she said that no one in the legal world liked me and that my staff were useless. Then she started yelling, "Jimmy Ray is going to rue the day." Some of the girls in the office were shaking and upset and thought she was going to attack me or one of the staff. And in the end, they escorted her out, still cursing me, and later they saw her driving around the office in her car. Apparently, she was soon bombarding Laura with threatening phone calls. One of them said, "I'll get you." And I don't know if bombarding was the journalist's word or Laura's, but she was also apparently smearing her to other lawyers and her husband's political associates, including Donald Dewar, who was Scotland's First Minister, and he was also allegedly harassed. And she was said to have often turned up at his constituency surgeries, claiming to be his special advisor. And at that time, she was trying to get a Labour seat. Laura Ray started studying at Strathclyde University in Glasgow, and she said that Fiona Harvey would suddenly pop up at conferences she went to. She said that she would often come and stand next to Laura while she was waiting for the lecture theatre doors to open. She said she was almost breathing on her and that she was very scared. So much so that she got other students to walk her to her car. She ended up complaining to the university about her, and they told her that she had gone to the university but she'd since been permanently excluded, and that was because of her behaviour towards students and staff. Since then, she said that she would get disturbing phone calls from her and that once she turned up at her house. One of the disturbing voice messages said, "I'm going to get you." So that's obviously very threatening. And Mrs. Ray said she was so frightened that she armed herself with a personal alarm and she insisted that all her staff did. In an interview with the Daily Record, Mrs. Ray claims to have served an interim interdict to stop Fiona Harvey from contacting her. But Fiona Harvey said in the Piers Morgan interview that she didn't do that correctly, that there was due to some technicality that wasn't processed properly. Which, I mean, what does that really mean? I don't think that makes Fiona Harvey look any better, because it still means that Mrs. Ray intended to do this. In an interview with the Mail on Sunday, Mrs. Ray has said she was stalked by Fiona Harvey for 5 years, resulting in her getting a restraining order against her. She's considering taking legal action against Fiona Harvey after she claimed Mrs. Ray harassed her in the Piers Morgan interview. And Mrs. Ray has said in this interview that she felt defamed. She said many of the things she said were completely and utterly wrong, and I would really like to set the record straight. Now I'm giving consideration to the possibility of raising an action for defamation against Ms. Harvey. The documents from Mrs. Ray asking a sheriff to grant an order have been seen by the Daily Mail, according to the Daily Mail, and they apparently detail the reasons Mrs. Ray asked the court to intervene. And these reasons include reporting Mrs. Ray to social services for allegedly harming her disabled son. She said that she had hit her son while she was driving, which Mrs. Ray says isn't true. When would she have had the opportunity to have seen Mrs. Ray in the car? I'm imagining that that would have been before she got fired. And so it seems that she complained about her to social services as payback for getting fired. And Mrs. Ray says she's now afraid she's going to be stalked all over again now that Fiona Harvey is in the media. She's said Fiona Harvey has already been saying nasty things about her on Facebook, and she doesn't know how far she's going to take it this time. And that's not all. A Daily Mail journalist has said she's stalked him. Neil Sears interviewed her and then said that within 10 minutes of the interview, she was already calling him. And she then called him 3 times just on his way home. And he said he'd never encountered such a tsunami of calls. He said the following day there were 10 calls, the day after there were 14 calls, and the day after that there were 24 phone calls. In each case, the calls came from a no caller ID number. And on the first day, he did answer the phone. And then he stopped answering it, of course. He said the most chilling voice message called him a "see you next Tuesday" and said he had made a bitter enemy out of her. He describes her voice messages as rambling stream of consciousness messages like in Baby Reindeer, and he says he can imagine how terrifying this would have been for her other victims. He'd worked on a story with the feature writer Barbara Davies, and one of the most abusive messages was about that. She apparently said, "I will call the police if you ever approach me. I am suing you and that newspaper and the bimbo who wrote the article with you. I hope that's clear even to a moron like you, and I will be demanding the newspaper sack you. I don't like you. I've never liked you." She then started to apparently unleash abuse on her Facebook page, telling everybody that he was fat and ugly. She described him as not very bright, a nutter, and a "see you next Tuesday" again. And she said he wouldn't get off her phone. So that's kind of interesting how she's turned that on him, her behaviour onto him. She also said he was an overgrown bipolar schoolboy. And just as she did with Piers Morgan, she claimed she was owed more money for the interview, and she demanded £3,000 per hour of her time. And she also apparently falsely claimed that he had abused other journalists and that he hated Richard Gadd. And then at the end of his article, there was this no caller ID number ringing even as he was typing. She seems to have seen the article that was written about her as rejection. And she wasn't able to let go of it because rejection affects her so deeply. And she had to get revenge in order to overcome the humiliation and shame. So that's again a sign of how deeply rejection affects her and what she makes of it, what it means to her about herself. And she has to try to be in control of other people and to put them down and punish them for rejecting her in order to feel okay about herself again afterwards. Given that, and given the way she behaved in the Piers Morgan interview, it did seem that there may be traits of borderline personality disorder in her character. If that is the case, does that mean she has a mental illness, and does it mean she should be seen as vulnerable, that if she's interviewed in public and asked questions about the stalking, does that mean she's being exploited? There isn't a definite definition for mental illness. So it's quite a vague term. And in the past, it's been very much separated from personality disorders as a totally different, separate thing. But if we look at what borderline personality disorder is, it's about not being in control of your emotions. It's about having overwhelming emotions that can switch very suddenly. And so it makes sense that the person who experiences that is going to be suffering from some kind of mental health problems. So when they're negative emotions, they're likely to feel depressed and anxious. So I do think it's fair to say that somebody who has borderline personality disorder suffers from a mental illness. But there are so many people with personality disorders who commit crimes and end up in prison. And there isn't a lot of public sympathy for them. People aren't saying that their photo shouldn't be shown, and they aren't saying that they should not be talked about, they shouldn't be identified. You could argue that Fiona Harvey hasn't been convicted of a crime, that she hasn't gone to prison for stalking, and it appears that she hasn't. It's been reported that Richard Gadd told Clerkenwell Films that the stalker was the subject of an exclusion order. And that's a civil order. It's not the same as a criminal conviction of stalking. Richard Gadd has apparently said that the reason she didn't go to prison was because of his input, because he felt sorry for her. He felt she'd been missed by the system and she needed help. And so for that reason, he didn't let things get that far. Again, it's hard to know what's true and what isn't. But if she has stalked at least 2 people and harassed a third, in fact, what he talks about as harassment is actually stalking anyway. So if she has stalked 3 people, then she has committed a crime 3 times. Since I made this video, there have been claims in the media that she also stalked Keir Starmer, the leader of the Labour Party. and that she sent him nearly 300 emails. If this is true, and the other 3 alleged victims haven't lied to the media, and it seems unlikely that they have, given that they claim to all have had physical evidence, like voicemails and emails, then that means that Fiona Harvey has stalked at least 4 people. And those are only the ones that have come forward, so there could be many more. Again, we could argue that because she hasn't been convicted of the crime, nobody needs to know about it. And certainly there's a duty of care that Netflix had. She's been depicted in a very negative light. She's automatically going to be in a vulnerable position because it's so easy to track down this real character. And that duty of care is important regardless of whether she does or doesn't have a personality disorder, and regardless of the state of her mental health. It's a right to privacy that we all have. So it's understandable that there is going to be some public sympathy for her for that reason. But I think that this sympathy has been taken more than a step further. People really seem to feel for her, and this seems to stem from the fact that they see her as having a mental illness. In one way, I think that's great. It's good that society is becoming kinder towards people with mental illnesses and more understanding of them. But in this situation, the person who's getting all of the media attention and all of the public sympathy is the alleged perpetrator. The victim of this alleged stalking, Richard Gadd, has talked about how much this did affect his mental health, and how destructive it was in his life. And yet, he's not getting sympathy from people now. Maybe he was when they watched the series. But now it's his supposed stalker who's getting all of the attention. Is she a victim who would never have wanted the character in the series to use her social media posts so that she would never have been discovered? Or is she someone who has managed to make Richard Gadd's success and newfound fame her own? Someone who has viciously slated him to the public to create a widely discussed smear campaign about him, who is still harassing him, but via the media this time. I think that it was naive of Netflix to have thought that she wasn't going to pop up and announce herself to the world, because Martha is the kind of person who regularly pops up throughout the series whenever she's not welcome and not invited.
You can't let her affect us like this.
She seems desperate for Donnie's attention. I read an article by somebody who was praising the legal team of Netflix, and he was saying they're so careful. They wouldn't have let something like this go unless they were convinced that that person wouldn't pop up in public and say that this stuff wasn't true, that she wouldn't want to go to court because she wouldn't want her life shown in front of the court. But the character Martha isn't led by logic. She doesn't think these things through slowly and rationally. She rushes into things, and she wants to be in the limelight. She needs all the attention. She's heckling when Donnie is up on stage being a comedian.
I miss you.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is my stalker.
She's not comfortable with him getting the attention. She needs it. So I believe that if Fiona Harvey's character is closely based on Martha's, that this is going to be exactly what she wants. She's going to want all of this attention, and she's going to want sympathy from the public. And she's going to milk it as much as she can, because that's what she's all about. That's how she feels important. Personality disorders are a result of childhood trauma. And so you'd be right to empathise with the children that go through such horrible things that they develop personality disorders. But by the time they're committing crimes and hurting other people, they're many years away from those things that happen to them. And you could see it in two ways. You could see it as they're already damaged, there's nothing that they could have done, and their fate was sealed really when the abuse happened in childhood, and therefore we should have a lot of empathy for them. and they should be protected. Or you could argue that they could have sought help. They could have done something to change after that trauma took place. And how much can we change? If you've got antisocial personality disorder, for example, are you going to be able to become somebody who has normal amounts of empathy? I never like to think never, but at the same time, the evidence shows that it's very unlikely. So you could argue that people don't really have free will in that respect. And I think that's probably right on the money. But these traumatized children have grown into adults who are seething with rage and who want to take that rage out on other people and to hurt other people. And stalking is one of the ways in which they can do that. I wonder if she has so much sympathy from the public because the character she allegedly represents was a woman stalking a man, and stalking isn't taken seriously, especially not stalking of a man by a woman. One of the things Piers Morgan said in the interview was that she's been accused of things that are much more serious. And he's talking about when Martha physically lashed out at Donnie's girlfriend, and another time Martha sexually touched Donnie in public. But are these things so much more serious than stalking? I personally don't think they are at all. I think that if she stalked him as much as he says she did, it's a lot more destructive than lashing out at someone on one occasion and not causing lasting physical harm. So I think a lot of the general response comes down to an ill-informed public who don't understand stalking, and they don't understand the effect it can have on a victim. The emphasis in the media is on Fiona Harvey and how she's been victimised. It's not on people who've had their lives torn apart by it. But one positive thing has come out of all of this, and that's that a stalking charity in the UK says that 80% more men have come forward to tell them about stalking in their lives since Baby Reindeer has been released. And they've quoted things that Donnie has said, and they've said, I feel exactly the same as this. And so I think that's really powerful and really important. And it makes me think about how all of these front pages could be filled with stories from real men who have experienced what Donnie in the series experienced, so that people could be made more aware of all of this. And instead, all we're hearing about is Fiona Harvey, you know, and she's appearing in all of these different interviews and getting all of this media and public attention, which I think is exactly what she wants. So in the next video, I'm going to look more closely at Fiona Harvey and the way she appeared in the interview with Piers Morgan. I'm going to look at some of the things she said there. So if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe, and I'll see you then.